Hello and welcome to this training on going gluten-free and dairy-free. I am Katie. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, Kundalini yoga teacher, certified personal trainer, and a PCOS weight loss coach. And I'm very excited today to be talking with you about going gluten and dairy-free to help you with your PCOS. Now, this is a hot topic in the PCOS community. Some people say I can eat gluten and dairy and be totally fine with PCOS, and other people say it is the miracle cure. Now, I wouldn't say either of those things. However, I do encourage my clients when they work with me to try going gluten-free and dairy-free, and it is something that I definitely support them through because it can be very hard and confusing to try it on your own, especially if you're new to PCOS or if you are new to dealing with diet, nutrition, dairy, and gluten, because as we'll talk about in this training, gluten and dairy can be hiding in some very interesting places. So in this training, we're going to be talking about why I recommend to my clients to go gluten and dairy free, how to do it, and then how to come up with alternatives. So when you're craving your favorite dairy product like cheese, or when you're craving your favorite gluten product like pasta or bread, how to come up with alternatives for that. All right, so let's get into the why first. So the first reason that I encourage my clients when they work with me to go gluten and dairy free is because of food sensitivities. Now, sensitivities are different from allergies or any sort of autoimmune response that might happen when you eat a food that you might be allergic to. Sensitivities people tend to miss because they show up in things that we don't necessarily connect to our eating habits. So this could be things like joint pains, headaches, maybe just some minor bloating, things that we wouldn't normally put together with food. Maybe even your mood changes. That can be a sign of, or your energy, those can be signs of food sensitivities. And when it comes to food sensitivities, dairy and gluten are two of the biggest culprits, meaning they are two of the most common sensitivities. Again, a sensitivity doesn't mean, you're on the toilet or you're having an allergic reaction. It's just something that's causing inflammation. And what we don't really want that inflammation, that chronic inflammation when you're trying to manage your PCOS and when you're trying to lose weight, because that can actually have the opposite effect. It can make your PCOS symptoms worse, and it can make weight loss even harder. So we're really trying to move away from sensitivities, and a good way to do that is to try cutting those foods out and see if you notice a difference. So that's one really big reason that I encourage the women that I work with to cut out gluten and dairy, to see if they have that sensitivities, see if they notice any difference from cutting out gluten and dairy. So the next big reason why I recommend going gluten-free and dairy-free when my clients work with me is to help them balance their blood sugar. Now, balancing blood sugar is huge for PCOS. It is one of my main pillars that I work with women on who have PCOS, and that is because 70% of women with PCOS are also insulin resistant. So that means having high insulin levels because your cells are not responding to the insulin anymore, which will spike your blood sugar because the glucose is not getting used as it should be. So both dairy and gluten can really spike your blood sugar, increase that insulin that goes out. So we really want to try to balance blood sugar and eat more blood sugar friendly meals and meal combinations. So trying to stay away from simpler carbs, which would be things like your breads and your pasta. So when you cut gluten out, that is naturally going to take care of that. And same thing with milk. Milk can have a higher sugar content, and we want to stay away from anything that's going to spike your blood sugar. Now, the last reason that I encourage my clients to go gluten and dairy free is because of the toxins that can be in both gluten and dairy. And when I say toxins, I'm not talking about something that's poisonous and it's going to kill you if you eat even just a little bit. I'm talking about things like antibiotics, like pesticides that are sprayed on the grain. And unfortunately, gluten is a huge culprit when it comes to pesticides. Non-organic grain product or wheat products can have a lot of Roundup on them, and we do not want to be eating Roundup, or it's also called glyphosate. That can really, when you eat too much of that, what that does is it can interfere with your hormones. It's an endocrine disruptor, and we're trying to move into a space of hormonal alignment, not make even more hormonal chaos, which is what that glyphosate can do. Same thing when it comes to dairy. Dairy can have all sorts of antibiotics and added hormones to it, which again, we are trying to stay away from to increase our gut health, increase our hormone health. So cutting those things out is a really great way to work on reducing your toxic load. All right, so now let's move on to how to go gluten and dairy free. So the first thing you want to consider when you're going gluten and dairy free is checking everything. Now, this happens a lot where I say, you know, have you considered going gluten and dairy free? And people will say, oh, I don't really eat a lot of gluten products or dairy products. I'm sure you've probably heard of people doing the same thing with sugar, where they say, oh, I don't eat sugar. But the problem is that sugar is hiding in a lot of places. And that is the case with dairy and gluten as well. And I'm not just talking about in, you know, food products. You definitely want to make sure that you are checking your processed foods, because these are two ingredients that are very likely to be in any sort of processed food. And when I say processed food, I mean the center aisles of the grocery store. But you also want to check things like salad dressings, like envelopes, like hair products, because these things, and tea bags, these things can also have gluten and dairy in them. So if you're trying to completely cut out dairy or gluten, you really want to be careful with not only the food you're eating, but also your personal care products and even things like envelopes and tea bags, because that could be hiding in there. So just being really mindful, making sure that you are reading that ingredients list when you are looking to buy products. So let's talk about how to come up with alternatives. So the first thing I want to say about this is, just because something says that it is gluten-free or dairy-free is not a sticker that is saying I am healthy. A lot of people fall into this trap where we hear this health buzz term, whether it's vegan, whether it's sugar-free, sometimes it will say like enriched, but just because something has a term like that on the label does not automatically make it healthy. There are plenty of gluten-free and dairy-free products out there that are full of all sorts of hormone disrupting chemicals, rancid fats, just things that you don't really want to be putting into your body if you don't have to. So first of all, make sure that you are checking the ingredients and knowing that just because something says it is gluten-free and dairy-free is not an automatic sticker of approval, PCOS friendly food. Again, you really want to make sure that you are reading all of the ingredients. The second thing when it comes to alternatives is you really want to find an alternative for the things that you love the most. So for instance, I really love coffee and I love having creamer in my coffee, but I don't really eat dairy. So I have found a creamer that I really love that is not an unhealthy dairy-free creamer. It's got good ingredients in it. And so I can still enjoy my coffee and it can still be yummy and creamy and not have dairy in it. So a good tip to start searching for alternatives is to go to a health food store. Now, again, just because it's in a health food store does not mean that it is automatically going to be healthy. Again, you really want to look out for the ingredients. However, health food stores are more likely to have a lot of different alternatives. And luckily, more and more people are trying gluten-free and dairy-free. So there are more and more products every day that are going to fit into a gluten-free and dairy-free lifestyle. It just might take a little bit of experimenting with to see what you personally like, but it is very helpful to have those to make sure that you can still have those products that you like, but they are dairy-free and gluten-free. So when you get that craving for ice cream, yes, they do make very good dairy-free and even sugar-free ice cream. Then you have that on hand and you aren't like, oh, I really want the ice cream, and you go eat dairy and then you don't feel good. And if you're working on trying to see if you have a sensitivity to that, then it kind of just stops your progress. Not to mention, like we said, it can spike your blood sugar. And the last thing that I want to say about this, and that I tell all of my clients when we talk about taking out different foods from their diet, is always come at this from I am avoiding dairy and gluten. Never say that I am never eating that again unless that is what you really want. Because when we get into that, oh, I'm never going to have that very restrictive mindset, then that's when it becomes really hard to stick to. Not to mention, if you never, ever eat those again, and then you say you eat it, let's say 10 years later, you might develop a sensitivity to it because you haven't had dairy or gluten in a long time. So just remember to use the word avoid, because it can be hard to know what's in a dish when you go out to restaurants. And just because something had, one pat of butter on it, that shouldn't ruin the night for you. So again, remembering to stay in that more expansive mindset where you're saying, I avoid these and I'm not outright restricting, never doing this again. All right, so to recap, we went over gluten-free and dairy-free, why you should do it, talking about food sensitivities, balancing your blood sugar, and working on reducing your toxic load. We talked about how to do it, making sure you're checking the labels, making sure you're checking uncommon products that you wouldn't think would have gluten and dairy in them, but sometimes do. And then we talk about making sure you knew how to find alternatives that, one, had better for you ingredients in them, and two, to make sure you had those alternatives for foods that you really love. So if this resonated with you and you are interested in learning more about gluten and dairy free and PCOS and other ways to help you lose weight and calm your PCOS, then you can send me a DM either on Facebook or on Instagram, or you can use the link in the description to book a clarity call so we can really dive into your PCOS, what the root cause is, and how I can support you in overcoming it. So thank you so much for watching this training. I really hope it resonated.